Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Looper, 2012, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. The future is never simple. It's unpredictable, messy, and often terrifying. But what if the future could be controlled? What if you could erase problems before they even began? That's the world of Looper, a film that takes time travel, a concept already tangled with paradoxes, and weaves it into a story that is as thrilling as it is thought-provoking. Directed by Rian Johnson, Looper isn't just another sci-fi film. It's a gripping blend of action, mystery, and existential philosophy wrapped inside a brutal world where time is both a weapon and a curse. It's the year 2044. Time travel hasn't been invented yet, but in 30 years, it will be. And when it is, it won't be used for grand adventures or scientific breakthroughs. It will be used by the mob. In the future, disposing of bodies is nearly impossible due to intense tracking systems, so criminal organizations find a simple solution: send their targets back in time to be executed in the past. That's where loopers come in, hitmen who eliminate these future-marked victims the moment they arrive. Joe Simmons, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, is one of these loopers. He's good at his job. He's ruthless, efficient, and never asks questions. He stands in a cornfield, shotgun ready, waiting for a hooded figure to materialize from thin air. A split second later, boom, the body is gone, the silver bars that serve as his payment are collected, and the cycle continues. It's just business. Until one day, it isn't. There's a rule every looper knows. One day, your future self will be sent back for execution. It's called closing the loop. The moment that happens, you kill your future self, collect a massive payday, and live out your remaining 30 years in peace. Except when Joe's moment comes, he hesitates. Because the man who appears before him isn't just any target, it's himself, 30 years older. And he isn't going down without a fight. Bruce Willis plays Old Joe, a hardened, desperate version of Joe from the future. He doesn't come back just to be executed, he comes back with a mission. In his time, the world has fallen into chaos, controlled by a mysterious and terrifying figure known only as the Rainmaker. Old Joe's wife was murdered in this dystopian future, and he's determined to stop the Rainmaker before he ever rises to power. His plan? To track down and kill the child who will eventually become the Rainmaker, preventing the future destruction from happening at all. But there's a problem. That child is just an innocent boy, Sid, played by Pierce Gagnon. And he's not just any child. He's special. Sid possesses telekinetic abilities beyond anything the world has ever seen. While most people in this world have mild TK powers, able to float small objects at best, Sid's abilities are terrifying, capable of massive destruction when he loses control. Joe, still young and self-serving, doesn't care about the future war or Old Joe's quest for revenge. All he wants is his life back. He chases his older self across the city, trying to stop him before the authorities, known as the Gat Men, catch them both. But the more time he spends with Sid and his mother, Sarah, Emily Blunt, the more he starts to see the terrifying truth. The Rainmaker isn't just a myth. He's real. And he might not have to become a monster if someone makes the right choice. What follows is a tense, mind-bending journey where the lines between right and wrong blur. Is Old Joe truly a villain for trying to stop future horrors? Or is he just creating them? Is Sid destined to become the Rainmaker, or can his path be changed? And most importantly, can Joe, a man who has spent his life taking orders, finally make a choice that isn't about himself? As past, present, and future collide, Looper delivers a gripping mix of high-stakes action, psychological tension, and moral dilemmas that force both its characters and its audience to question everything. The film builds to a climax that is both shocking and inevitable, one that lingers in your mind long after the credits roll. And the biggest twist of all? The only way to break the cycle isn't through violence or vengeance. It's through sacrifice. But what does that mean for Joe? And will his choice be enough to rewrite the future? Stay tuned, because this is one time travel story where the biggest paradox isn't in the science, it's in the human heart. A future built on loops. The year is 2044, but the real story starts 30 years later. Time travel hasn't been invented yet, but it will be. And when it is, it won't be used for wonder or discovery. It will be used for crime. In the future, bodies are impossible to dispose of, leaving criminal organizations with a major problem. Their solution? Send their victims back in time to be executed in the past. Enter loopers, the men who do the killing. They don't ask questions. They don't hesitate. They just stand at their assigned location, shotgun in hand, waiting for a hooded figure to appear from thin air. A pull of the trigger, a body drops, and the payment, bars of silver, are collected. It's a clean, simple system. Until it isn't. Joe Simmons is one of the best loopers in the game. Young, confident, and ruthless, he lives in the grime of Kansas City, a place overrun by poverty, crime, and corruption. The streets are lined with beggars, and addiction runs rampant. Many, including Joe himself, are hooked on dropper drugs, liquid doses that numb reality just enough to make this world bearable. But Joe doesn't care about any of that. He's focused on his future, saving his silver bars to one day retire to a life of comfort far away from this wasteland. Loopers have one rule. One day, your future self will be sent back for execution. When that happens, you kill them instantly and close the loop. It's the deal every looper signs up for. Enjoy the wealth, knowing that one day, the gun will be turned on yourself. Joe doesn't think about that day. He doesn't let it weigh on him. Until suddenly, it's here. He's in the field, the same as always, waiting for his next target. But when the hooded figure appears and the bag is pulled off his head, Joe doesn't see just any victim. He sees himself, 30 years older, battered, scarred, and staring right back at him. For the first time in his career, Joe hesitates. And old Joe runs. The chase begins. Nothing like this is supposed to happen. If a looper lets his older self escape, the punishment is brutal. Death. Immediately, young Joe is on the run. His boss, Abe, the man sent from the future to oversee the loopers, orders his men, the ruthless Gat men, to hunt him down. Abe isn't someone you want to disappoint. Unlike the other crime lords, he carries himself with an eerie calmness, his voice gentle even when he's delivering a death sentence. He knows things others don't, and he has no patience for disobedience. Joe's only chance is to find old Joe before the Gat men do. But old Joe isn't just trying to survive, he has a mission of his own. In the future, something terrible has happened. The world has fallen under the control of a mysterious, terrifying figure known only as the Rainmaker, a man who seemingly rose out of nowhere, killing off rival gangs and taking control with an iron fist. Old Joe's own wife was murdered in the chaos, and he's not willing to let that happen again. But old Joe has information. He knows who the Rainmaker is before he becomes the monster that will destroy everything. He has a list of 3 possible children, any of whom could grow up to be the Rainmaker. And he's decided that the only way to save the future is to kill the child before he can become that person. Joe's desperate escape. Young Joe, still not grasping the weight of what's happening, just wants to fix his mistake and get his life back. He manages to track down old Joe in a run-down diner, where the two finally sit across from each other. It's a strange, tense conversation. One man is fighting for his future, the other is trying to erase it. Old Joe tries to explain. He tells young Joe that this isn't just about them. It's about something bigger, something that could change the course of history. But young Joe doesn't care. He isn't thinking about the fate of the world. He's thinking about his own survival. Then, suddenly, gunfire erupts. The Gat men have found them. Amid the chaos, Old Joe escapes again, determined to find the child who will become the Rainmaker. Young Joe, wounded and running out of options, follows the only lead he has, a name connected to one of the children on Old Joe's list. That name is Sara. And that's where everything changes. A boy, a future, and a choice that changes everything. Joe arrives at a secluded farmhouse, deep in the countryside, far from the chaos of Kansas City. The world here is different, quiet, untouched by the violence and desperation of the streets. It belongs to Sara, a fiercely independent woman who has fortified her home like a fortress. And inside that house is Sid, the boy who, according to Old Joe's list, might grow up to become the Rainmaker. Sara is wary of Joe the moment she sees him. She knows trouble when it walks through her door, and Joe is trouble personified. He tries to hide the truth at first, but Sara isn't naive. She knows men like him don't just show up by accident. What she doesn't know, what Joe himself hasn't fully realized, is that the boy she's protecting might be the most dangerous person in the world. Sid isn't like other children. He's gifted, but not in the way people whisper about with admiration. Most people in this world have weak telekinetic abilities, able to make small objects float for amusement. But Sid? Sid can tear apart a room without touching a thing. At first, Joe doesn't believe it. He watches as the boy plays, as he clings to his mother with a fierceness that suggests he's not the monster Old Joe believes him to be. But then something happens. Sid loses control. It's not just a temper tantrum. It's a storm of power. When he's afraid, when he feels cornered, his abilities explode outward in a terrifying surge. Objects levitate, furniture shatters, the walls groan as if the entire house is alive. Joe barely survives the first time he witnesses it, scrambling to safety as Sara rushes to calm her son. And suddenly, Old Joe's mission makes sense. Old Joe's ruthless pursuit. Meanwhile, Old Joe is closing in. He's already killed one child from his list, and he's not stopping until the job is done. He doesn't care about alternate futures, about the moral weight of killing a child. He's seen the devastation the Rainmaker will bring. And he's convinced that if he can stop it now, everything he lost can be undone. The Gat men are also closing in. Abe's right-hand man, Kid Blue, has been chasing young Joe since the beginning, desperate to prove himself. He's reckless, volatile, and eager to clean up Abe's mess. With every passing moment, the noose tightens around all of them. Back at the farmhouse, Sara confesses the truth to Joe. Sid isn't just a boy. He's her son. And more than that, he might not be the Rainmaker yet, but he could be. Joe sees it now. The power. The fear in Sara's eyes when Sid loses control. The desperate way she tries to teach him to manage his emotions, to be careful, to hold back. She believes in him. She believes she can raise him to be better. But history, Old Joe's history, says otherwise. A final confrontation. As the sun sets, Joe knows it's only a matter of time before everything collides. Old Joe arrives at the farm, gun in hand, determined to finish what he started. Sara fights back, but she's no match for him. Joe, caught between two versions of himself, tries to stop the inevitable. Then, Sid sees his mother hurt, and the world erupts. Everything lifts into the air. The ground shakes. Old Joe is thrown backward, his gun flying from his hand. Sid is no longer a scared child. He is something else entirely. A force of nature. The very thing Old Joe has feared his entire life. Sara, wounded but conscious, manages to call out to Sid, begging him to stop. And for the first time, Sid hesitates. Joe realizes the truth in that moment. Sid isn't the Rainmaker yet. But if Old Joe kills Sara? If Sid loses the only person who believes in him? That's the moment that creates the monster. And Joe makes a choice. He knows Old Joe won't stop. Even if Sid spares him now, even if he runs, Old Joe will never stop hunting him. And that relentless pursuit, that cycle of violence, will be what turns Sid into the Rainmaker. So Joe raises his gun and turns it on himself, breaking the loop. With a single shot, young Joe erases his future self from existence. Old Joe vanishes before he can pull the trigger on Sid. The chaos stops. The storm fades. Sid, trembling, collapses into Sara's arms. The loop is broken. For the first time, the future is unwritten, an ending that lingers. As Sara holds her son, Joe's body lies motionless in the field. His story ends there, but in doing so, he gives Sid a chance at something different. No Rainmaker. No cycle of revenge. No broken future. Sara takes Sid's hand, leading him back inside. She still has work to do, raising him, teaching him to control his power, guiding him away from the darkness that once seemed inevitable. And for Joe? He may not have lived to see it, but in the end, he changed everything. A story of fate, choices, and redemption, the characters of Looper. Every great film is built on the shoulders of its characters, and Looper is no exception. This isn't just a time travel thriller or a high-concept action film. It's a character-driven story about fate, choice, and the cost of redemption. The people who exist within its world aren't heroes or villains in the traditional sense. They are complex, flawed, and, most importantly, human. Each of them is fighting for something: survival, revenge, love, or change. And it's their conflicts, both internal and external, that make Looper so gripping. At its heart, Looper is a movie about a man confronting himself, literally. Joe Simmons is split between two versions: his younger self, selfish and lost, and his older self, hardened by regret. But they aren't the only ones caught in a web of choices that could reshape the future. From Sara's fierce determination to Sid's terrifying potential, every character in Looper represents a different aspect of the film's core themes. Joe Simmons, Joseph Gordon-Levitt / Bruce Willis, a man fighting himself. Joe is a fascinating protagonist because he exists in two forms, each with different goals. Young Joe is driven by self-preservation. He wants to live, get rich, and retire somewhere far away. He's willing to kill without hesitation, and he doesn't care about the consequences of his actions beyond how they affect him. But then there's Old Joe, the man he will become. And Old Joe has something young Joe doesn't: something to lose. The older version of Joe has lived a full life. He found love, something his younger self never imagined he needed. But that love was ripped away from him, and now all he can think about is fixing his future, even if it means killing a child. He justifies his actions, telling himself that one life now is worth millions later. But deep down, he knows the truth. He's doing this for himself, not for the world. Their dynamic is one of the most compelling aspects of the film. Unlike traditional time travel movies, where the younger version follows in the footsteps of the older, Looper flips the script. Young Joe doesn't want to become Old Joe. He sees what his future holds, and he doesn't like what he sees. Meanwhile, Old Joe is desperate to change the past, but in doing so, he creates the very future he's trying to prevent. The tragedy of Joe is that neither version fully understands the bigger picture until it's too late. Young Joe spends most of the movie focused on fixing his mistake, finding and killing Old Joe so he can go back to his selfish plans. But as he gets to know Sara and Sid, he realizes something Old Joe never could: the cycle of violence won't end unless someone makes the ultimate sacrifice. And so, Joe does something that neither version expected. He breaks the loop. By killing himself, he prevents Old Joe from ever existing, stopping the Rainmaker's creation before it begins. It's a rare kind of redemption, not through survival, but through self-destruction. And in that moment, Joe becomes something more than just a hired killer. He becomes the man who made the one choice that mattered. Sara, Emily Blunt, a mother fighting for the future. Sara is the heart of Looper, even though she doesn't appear until the second half of the film. Unlike Joe, who starts the story focused on himself, Sara's only concern is her son, Sid. She's not just protecting him from the outside world, She's protecting the world from him. Sara represents hope, but not in the traditional sense. She's flawed, rough, and burdened by mistakes of her own. She was once a reckless woman, lost in the chaos of the world, but when she had Sid, she changed. She left her old life behind, choosing isolation to keep him safe. But that safety is fragile, because Sid is more dangerous than anyone realizes. Her relationship with Joe is tense at first. She doesn't trust him, and she has no reason to. But over time, something shifts. She sees that Joe is different from the other killers who have come for them. She sees that he's capable of making a choice, of understanding the bigger picture. More than anyone, Sara believes that Sid isn't destined to become a monster. She knows he's powerful, but she also knows that power is shaped by the people around him. If she can raise him with love, if she can teach him control, maybe the Rainmaker never has to exist. That's why Joe's final choice is so powerful. It's an act of faith in Sara. He doesn't know for sure that she can change Sid's fate. He doesn't know if the Rainmaker is truly inevitable. But he believes in her. And that's enough. Sid, Pierce Gagnon, the boy who could destroy everything. Sid is the most terrifying character in the film precisely because he isn't a villain yet. He's a child, innocent in many ways, but also capable of unimaginable destruction. Unlike the other telekinetics in Looper, who can barely float coins, Sid's abilities are on another level entirely. When he's afraid or angry, he doesn't just lift objects, he tears reality apart. He's the kind of force that shouldn't exist, and that's exactly why old Joe is hunting him. But Sid isn't a monster. He loves his mother. He's capable of kindness and warmth. The question is, will he grow up to be the Rainmaker because he's destined to, or because people like old Joe keep trying to kill him? That's the true paradox of the film. Old Joe is convinced he's stopping a future disaster, but his actions are what create it. If he kills Sid's mother, Sid will become the Rainmaker. If Joe stops him, the cycle ends. In the end, Looper makes a bold statement. Fate isn't written in stone. It's shaped by the choices we make. And Joe's choice gives Sid the chance to be something else. Abe, Jeff Daniels, the man who sees everything. Abe is the quiet menace behind the Loopers. Unlike the young gangsters who work under him, Abe is from the future, sent back to manage the organization and ensure that the system runs smoothly. He's not loud or aggressive like his henchmen, but that makes him even more dangerous. Abe represents control. He manipulates the Loopers, keeps them in check, and eliminates threats before they arise. He's the perfect example of the calculated, detached criminal mind that dominates this world. But for all his intelligence, he never sees Joe's final act coming. He assumes that Loopers are predictable, that they'll always take the easy way out. Joe's sacrifice proves him wrong. Kid Blue, Noah Segan, the fool who wants to be feared. Kid Blue is a minor character, but he plays an interesting role. He's desperate for respect, eager to prove himself to Abe, but he's reckless and often incompetent. He's a tragic figure in a way, a man who believes violence is the only way to earn his place. His arc is a reflection of Joe's. Unlike Joe, Kid Blue never changes. He remains trapped in his desire to be someone important, and ultimately, it leads to his downfall. The real story, a battle between destiny and choice. In the end, Looper isn't about time travel. It's about whether people can truly change their fate. Joe starts as a selfish man, but he chooses selflessness. Sara fights to protect Sid, believing that love can overcome destruction. Old Joe is consumed by revenge, but in trying to stop a disaster, he causes it. Sid is caught between two paths, one leading to destruction, the other to hope. And that's why Looper is so powerful. It asks the question, if you could change the future, would you? And even more importantly, would you be willing to sacrifice yourself to do it? Filmmaking is an art filled with unpredictable moments, hidden challenges, and behind-the-scenes decisions that shape the final product in ways most audiences never realize. Looper, 2012, is no exception. It's a movie that bends time, explores fate, and dives into paradoxes with a style that feels both futuristic and gritty. But what went on behind the camera is just as fascinating as what appeared on screen. Director Rian Johnson had a vision for Looper that was ambitious, blending the sleekness of sci-fi with the grounded, worn-down atmosphere of a crime thriller. But pulling off this balance wasn't easy. From the unique way they handled time travel logic to the shocking lengths they went to in order to transform Joseph Gordon-Levitt into a younger Bruce Willis, the making of this film was filled with oddities, experiments, and choices that shaped one of the most interesting sci-fi films of the last decade. One of the strangest aspects of Looper was how it approached the idea of casting Joseph Gordon. One of the strangest aspects of Looper was how it approached the idea of casting. Joseph Gordon-Levitt was locked in early to play the younger version of Joe, but once Bruce Willis was brought in to play his older counterpart, a major problem emerged. The two actors looked nothing alike. In most time travel movies, directors simply rely on suspension of disbelief to convince the audience that one actor will eventually age into another. But Rian Johnson wanted something more convincing. To bridge the gap between the two actors, Joseph Gordon-Levitt went through an intense transformation process. Instead of using CGI, which would have been expensive and difficult to maintain for the entire film, the team opted for practical prosthetics. Gordon-Levitt spent hours in the makeup chair every day having his nose reshaped, his eyebrows adjusted, and subtle details altered to make him resemble a younger Bruce Willis. But makeup alone wasn't enough. Gordon-Levitt studied Bruce Willis's mannerisms and speech patterns for weeks. He watched his old films, paid close attention to how he moved, and even had Willis record some of his lines so he could mimic his voice and cadence. It was a level of dedication rarely seen in sci-fi films, and the result was a performance that felt eerily close to what a younger version of Willis might actually be like. But even with all this effort, the transformation wasn't universally accepted. Some fans found it distracting, claiming that the altered facial structure made Gordon-Levitt look almost robotic. Others praised it as a fascinating experiment in character consistency. Regardless of the debate, it was one of the boldest and strangest decisions in the film's production. Beyond the actors, Looper was filled with small but fascinating details that added layers to its world. One of the film's biggest twists, the reveal that Sid had incredible telekinetic abilities, was kept secret from most of the promotional material. The trailers focused on time travel and assassins, but the entire Rainmaker subplot was largely hidden from audiences. Johnson wanted the reveal to feel organic, allowing the slow build-up of Sid's power to catch viewers off guard. Finding the right actor to play Sid was another challenge. Child roles in sci-fi films are notoriously tricky. Too often, young actors struggle to deliver performances that feel genuine. But Pierce Gagnon, who was only 5 years old at the time, shocked the entire crew. His ability to deliver emotionally complex lines with terrifying intensity made him one of the most memorable parts of the film. Rian Johnson later admitted that working with a child actor on such a difficult role was one of his biggest concerns going into production. But Gagnon was so naturally gifted that he required almost no direction. In many scenes, he understood his character's emotions better than some of the adult actors did. The film's time travel logic was another area that led to strange but intentional creative decisions. Unlike many sci-fi films that go deep into the mechanics of time travel, Looper takes a different approach. The rules aren't overly explained, and paradoxes aren't the central focus. Instead, the characters treat time travel as a dangerous tool, one that works, but one they don't fully understand. There's a key moment in the diner scene where young Joe presses old Joe for details about how time travel works. Old Joe, clearly frustrated, cuts him off, refusing to get into the details. This wasn't just a way to keep the conversation moving. It was a direct statement from the filmmakers. Rian Johnson knew that if the film spent too much time explaining paradoxes, it would slow the story down. Instead, he chose to let time travel be a narrative device rather than a puzzle to be solved. This decision left some audiences debating the film's logic long after it ended, but it also gave the story more room to breathe. But time travel did lead to one of the strangest and most brutal sequences in the film. One of the most memorable scenes involves Seth, a fellow looper who fails to close his loop. Instead of simply killing his future self, the crime syndicate does something much worse. They alter his past body piece by piece, cutting off limbs and scarring his younger self so that his older self literally falls apart. This sequence was one of the hardest to pull off. There were no special effects used to show Seth's gradual dismemberment. Instead, actor Paul Dano had to act out each stage of his body breaking down, reacting in real time as his fingers, legs, and tongue disappeared. The filmmakers used clever editing, camera angles, and practical effects to make the horror feel real without ever needing to rely on graphic violence. It was one of the most chilling uses of time travel in film history, and it cemented Looper as a movie willing to take risks. The world-building in Looper was another strange but carefully crafted aspect of the film. Instead of creating a sleek, high-tech future like many sci-fi films, Rian Johnson wanted a world that felt used, broken, and believable. The cars are old but modified with futuristic parts. The buildings are crumbling, hinting at an economic collapse that's never explicitly explained. Even the weapons feel retro. Loopers don't use laser guns or advanced technology. They use blunderbuss-style shotguns that are powerful but imprecise. Many of these choices were made out of necessity. Looper was shot on a relatively modest budget of $30 million, and a full-scale futuristic redesign would have been too expensive. But instead of seeing this as a limitation, Johnson used it as an opportunity to create a unique world. The result is a future that feels like a believable extension of our own, a place that isn't clean or shiny, but messy and decayed. One of the final touches that made Looper unique was its use of practical effects over CGI. While many modern sci-fi films rely heavily on digital effects, Looper took a different route. From the time travel sequences to the telekinetic abilities, many effects were achieved practically. The levitating objects in Sid's scenes? They were filmed with wires and rigging, rather than being fully CGI. Even the time travel transitions were done with in-camera effects, blending editing tricks with subtle VFX enhancements. Even the ending was shaped by an unusual creative process. Originally, Rian Johnson considered a much more complex, mind-bending finale, one that would dive deeper into paradoxes and alternate timelines. But during post-production, he realized that the story didn't need that. Instead, he focused on character. The ending became about Joe's sacrifice, about breaking the cycle in the simplest but most powerful way possible. When Looper was finally released, it became a box office and critical success, earning praise for its originality and performances. But the film's legacy isn't just about its time travel concept, it's about the strange, bold, and often risky choices that made it stand out. A film that could have been just another sci-fi thriller became something more, a story about fate, sacrifice, and the idea that even in a world of loops, choices still matter. Time travel movies have a way of dividing audiences. Some love the mind-bending paradoxes, the way cause and effect fold in on themselves. Others find them frustrating, full of logical loopholes that unravel under scrutiny. When Looper was finally released, it became a box office and critical success, earning praise for its originality and performances. But the film's legacy isn't just about its time travel concept, it's about the strange, bold, and often risky choices that made it stand out. A film that could have been just another sci-fi thriller became something more, a story about fate, sacrifice, and the idea that even in a world of loops, choices still matter. Time travel movies have a way of dividing audiences. Some love the mind-bending paradoxes, the way cause and effect fold in on themselves. Others find them frustrating, full of logical loopholes that unravel under scrutiny. Looper exists somewhere in the middle. It doesn't dwell on the mechanics of time travel. It uses it as a storytelling tool, a means to explore fate, sacrifice, and the cost of choice. That's why the film resonated with so many people. It wasn't just a movie about when things happened, but why they happened. At the core of Looper is a fascinating moral dilemma, one that plays out across its most significant events. The story isn't just a chase between young Joe and old Joe, it's a battle between self-interest and self-sacrifice, vengeance and redemption. Every major event in the film challenges what we think we know about its characters, forcing them, and the audience, to confront the consequences of their choices. The film's opening moments set the stage perfectly. Young Joe, standing in a field, waiting for his next target to arrive from the future. His life is routine, mechanical. He kills without hesitation, collects his silver bars, and keeps moving. There's no emotional weight in his job. He's a cog in the machine, completely disconnected from the humanity of the people he executes. And that's exactly why it's so jarring when he fails to pull the trigger on his older self. This moment is the first real fracture in Joe's character. Hesitation isn't allowed in this world. Loopers know that one day their future selves will arrive, and they'll have to kill them. It's the price of the job. But when young Joe sees himself, something instinctual kicks in. He flinches. And in that tiny moment of indecision, everything changes. From a critical standpoint, this scene is one of the film's most important because it breaks the cycle before we even understand what that cycle truly is. It introduces a paradox, not just a time travel paradox, but an emotional one. Young Joe wants to survive, but so does old Joe. In trying to fight for his own existence, he's also fighting against it. The loop is already broken, even if neither version of Joe realizes it yet. The diner confrontation between the two Joes is another key moment that challenges the audience's perception of morality. Old Joe sits across from his younger self, trying to explain why his actions are justified. He's not just trying to save his own future, he's trying to save the world from the Rainmaker. But in doing so, he's willing to kill a child. This is where Looper separates itself from most time travel films. It doesn't just play with paradoxes, it forces the audience into a philosophical conflict. If you knew a child would grow up to become a ruthless dictator, could you justify killing them before they ever had a chance to change? This question has been explored in literature and philosophy for centuries, often framed around the idea of going back in time to kill someone like Hitler. But Looper complicates it further by making the child a blank slate. Sid isn't evil yet. He's just a scared boy with unimaginable power. What makes this moment so powerful is that old Joe refuses to see anything beyond his own grief. He believes he's stopping a war before it begins, but he never considers the fact that his actions might be what creates the very thing he fears. He sees Sid as a monster, but only because he's already made up his mind that he is one. This diner scene is also crucial from a cinematic perspective. Rian Johnson makes a bold choice here. He refuses to explain time travel. Old Joe literally tells young Joe that it doesn't matter, that if they start talking about how time travel works, they'll be sitting there all day making diagrams. It's a direct statement from the filmmakers. Looper isn't about the mechanics of time travel. It's about what people do with the time they have. As the story progresses, the film begins shifting its focus away from the chase between the two Joes and towards Sara and Sid. This is another subversion of traditional sci-fi storytelling. Instead of building toward a final showdown between protagonist and antagonist, Looper shifts gears into something more intimate and emotional. Sara's introduction recontextualizes everything we thought we knew about the Rainmaker. She isn't protecting Sid because she's in denial about his future. She's protecting him because she knows he can still change. The film never outright states whether Sid is truly destined to become the Rainmaker, but it strongly suggests that his environment is what will shape him. If he loses his mother, if he's raised in fear, if violence is the only thing he's taught, then yes, he will become the monster old Joe is trying to stop. But if he's given love, protection, and the chance to control his own power, then maybe the Rainmaker never has to exist at all. This is what makes Joe's final realization so devastating. Up until the climax, both versions of Joe believe they're in control of their own fates. Young Joe thinks he can fix things by stopping old Joe. Old Joe thinks he can fix things by killing Sid. Neither of them realize that they're both part of the problem. The turning point comes when Sid finally loses control. When he sees Sara being threatened, his abilities explode in a terrifying display of power. Old Joe, wounded but determined, raises his gun, ready to end the loop once and for all. But then young Joe understands. He sees how Sid is becoming the Rainmaker in real time. It's not some distant future, it's happening right in front of him. He sees the pain in Sara's eyes, the terror in Sid's. He realizes that if Old Joe pulls the trigger, Sid will never recover from it. That moment will define him, just as Old Joe's grief defined him. And so Joe makes the choice that neither version of him was willing to make before. He doesn't fight for his own survival. He doesn't try to win. He ends it. The decision to have young Joe kill himself is one of the most powerful moments in modern sci-fi. It's the only way to break the cycle, not through more violence, but through self-sacrifice. By removing himself from the equation, he ensures that Old Joe never existed, that the Rainmaker never had to rise. This moment is significant not just in terms of plot, but in terms of theme. It cements Looper's ultimate message: we are not bound by fate. We are defined by the choices we make. Critically, this ending was met with overwhelming praise. Many sci-fi films struggle to balance concept and emotion, often sacrificing one for the other. But Looper sticks the landing by making its final moments deeply personal rather than purely intellectual. The time travel mechanics don't matter. The rules don't need to be explained. What matters is that one man finally saw the bigger picture and made the ultimate choice. But that's not to say everyone loved it. Some viewers felt the ending was too abrupt, leaving questions about what happens next. The decision to have young Joe kill himself is one of the most powerful moments in modern sci-fi. It's the only way to break the cycle, not through more violence, but through self-sacrifice. By removing himself from the equation, he ensures that Old Joe never existed, that the Rainmaker never had to rise. This moment is significant not just in terms of plot, but in terms of theme. It cements Looper's ultimate message: we are not bound by fate. We are defined by the choices we make. Critically, this ending was met with overwhelming praise. Many sci-fi films struggle to balance concept and emotion, often sacrificing one for the other. But Looper sticks the landing by making its final moments deeply personal rather than purely intellectual. The time travel mechanics don't matter. The rules don't need to be explained. What matters is that one man finally saw the bigger picture and made the ultimate choice. But that's not to say everyone loved it. Some viewers felt the ending was too abrupt, leaving questions about what happens next. Others wished for a more traditional sci-fi conclusion, one that leaned into paradoxes rather than character-driven resolution. But for those who connected with the film's emotional core, Looper became one of the most satisfying time travel films in recent memory. Looking at Looper through a critical lens, it becomes clear that its strength isn't in its action or even its time travel concept, it's in its characters. Every major event in the film is built around choice, consequence, and the struggle between self-interest and selflessness. In the end, Looper asks a simple but profound question: are we doomed to repeat our mistakes, or can we break the cycle? Joe's answer? We can change. But only if we're willing to make the hardest choice of all. Making a movie like Looper was never going to be easy. It wasn't just another action film. It wasn't just another time travel thriller. It was a project that required a unique vision, a precise balance between science fiction and grounded realism, and a level of storytelling that challenged the audience while keeping them emotionally engaged. From the moment director Rian Johnson conceived the idea, he knew that Looper had to be different. It had to feel lived in, tactile, and raw, a world where time travel existed, but it wasn't the centerpiece. Instead, the film would focus on the people who lived in this world, the choices they made, and the consequences of their actions. The journey from script to screen was filled with unexpected challenges, surprising creative decisions, and moments of pure filmmaking ingenuity. Every piece of Looper, from the set design to the way time travel was portrayed, was carefully crafted to create something fresh, something that would stand out in a genre often dominated by overly complex narratives and flashy CGI. One of the first and most unusual challenges came with the casting of Joe Simmons, the film's protagonist, played in two different timelines by Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Bruce Willis. Normally, in time travel films, audiences are asked to simply accept that a younger actor will eventually grow into the older one. But Rian Johnson wanted a deeper connection between the two performances. He wanted the audience to truly believe that these two men were the same person, separated by 30 years. The solution: a bold, unconventional approach to makeup and performance. To bridge the physical gap between Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Bruce Willis, prosthetic effects were used to reshape Gordon-Levitt's face. His nose was altered, his jawline subtly adjusted, and even the way his eyes were framed was modified to better match Willis's features. But the makeup alone wasn't enough. Gordon-Levitt didn't just have to look like a young Bruce Willis, he had to sound and move like him, too. In preparation for the role, Gordon-Levitt studied Willis's mannerisms intensely. He watched hours of footage from Willis's previous films, focusing on the way he spoke, the cadence of his voice, and the small physical habits that made him distinctive. He even worked directly with Willis, having him record some of Joe's lines so he could practice imitating his speech patterns. The effect was startling. Even some of the cast and crew found it unsettling at times, watching Gordon-Levitt embody a younger version of the legendary actor with uncanny precision. Some audience members were distracted by the subtle but noticeable prosthetics, while others praised the effort, calling it one of the most unique approaches to a time travel film in years. But transforming an actor's face was just one of the film's many production challenges. Another major hurdle was creating a futuristic world that felt real, without relying on excessive CGI. Johnson and his team wanted Looper's world to be gritty, lived in, and grounded in reality. They didn't want sleek, high-tech cities with flying cars and holograms. Instead, they envisioned a future that felt broken, decayed, and just slightly more advanced than our own. To achieve this, they took an unusual approach, modifying real-world objects instead of designing brand-new futuristic elements. Take the cars, for example. In most sci-fi films, vehicles of the future are entirely redesigned, often appearing as sleek, floating machines with glowing blue lights. But in Looper, most of the cars are old models from the past, updated with makeshift modifications. Some have solar panels crudely attached to the hoods, while others have pipes and tubing running along their exteriors, as if people had to repurpose old technology to keep them running. This wasn't just a creative decision, it was a budgetary necessity. With a production budget of just $30 million, Johnson knew he couldn't afford massive CGI world building. Instead, he relied on practical effects, careful set design, and smart cinematography to suggest a world that had evolved, but not in the way people expected. One of the biggest surprises of the production was the location of the film's setting. While the story takes place in Kansas City, 2044, the movie was actually filmed in Louisiana. This was due to tax incentives that made shooting in the state far more affordable. However, this presented a new challenge. How do you make New Orleans and rural Louisiana feel like a decayed future version of Kansas City? The production team focused on using industrial, weathered locations, finding places that already had a slightly dystopian feel. Many of the city scenes were filmed in abandoned buildings, empty warehouses, and run-down streets, which only needed minor modifications to look futuristic. The result was a future that felt eerily close to the present, making it even more believable. Another key element of the film's world-building was how telekinesis was portrayed. In Looper, some people have developed minor telekinetic abilities, but for most, it's nothing impressive, just the ability to make small objects float. It's seen as a novelty, a party trick rather than a superpower. But Sid, the child who may grow up to be the Rainmaker, is different. His abilities are terrifying. Instead of flashy CGI explosions or overly elaborate energy blasts, his powers are shown in sudden, violent bursts of force. The scene where he loses control, causing the entire room to shake as objects hover in the air, was done mostly with practical effects. The team used hidden wires, air cannons, and precise camera work to create the illusion of objects being thrown around with an unseen force. Another key element of the film's world-building was how telekinesis was portrayed. In Looper, some people have developed minor telekinetic abilities, but for most, it's nothing impressive, just the ability to make small objects float. It's seen as a novelty, a party trick rather than a superpower. But Sid, the child who may grow up to be the Rainmaker, is different. His abilities are terrifying. Instead of flashy CGI explosions or overly elaborate energy blasts, his powers are shown in sudden, violent bursts of force. The scene where he loses control, causing the entire room to shake as objects hover in the air, was done mostly with practical effects. The team used hidden wires, air cannons, and precise camera work to create the illusion of objects being thrown around with an unseen force. One of the most haunting sequences in the film, where old Seth's body starts deteriorating in real time due to changes in the past, was also achieved with minimal CGI. Instead of using digital morphing effects, the team relied on practical prosthetics and clever editing. Paul Dano, who played Seth, had to perform each stage of his body's gradual disappearance, reacting as his fingers, limbs, and facial features were erased from existence. Rian Johnson has said that this scene was one of his favorites because it showed the horror of time travel consequences in a truly unsettling way. Instead of just talking about paradoxes, Looper makes them visceral, terrifying, and personal. Another interesting choice in the film was the decision to downplay the mechanics of time travel. Many sci-fi films get lost in explaining paradoxes, alternate timelines, and multiverse theories, but Johnson wanted to keep the focus on the characters and their choices. This is why, in the now iconic diner scene, when young Joe presses old Joe for details about time travel, old Joe shuts him down immediately. "I don't want to talk about time travel shit. If we start talking about it, we're gonna be here all day making diagrams with straws." This wasn't just a script choice, it was a message to the audience. Johnson knew that trying to explain time travel would lead to endless debates that could distract from the story. Instead, he made a bold move: let time travel be messy and unexplained, because in the end, it's the choices that matter, not the rules. When Looper was released, it was a surprise hit, grossing over $176 million worldwide on a modest budget. Critics praised its originality, performances, and balance of sci-fi and emotional depth. Even today, Looper remains one of the most unique sci-fi films of its era. It doesn't try to impress with spectacle, it impresses with storytelling. Every creative choice, from its low-tech future aesthetic to its focus on character-driven conflict, was designed to make the film feel grounded, raw, and real. And maybe that's why Looper endures. It isn't just a movie about time travel. It's a movie about the weight of our choices, the inevitability of consequence, and the power of a single moment to change everything. The world of Looper is one that feels both strangely familiar and deeply unsettling. It's not the glossy, high-tech future that sci-fi films often portray. There are no flying cars, no shimmering glass cities towering over the landscape, no neon-soaked streets filled with holographic advertisements. Instead, the future in Looper looks worn out, broken, and eerily close to the present, a world where the edges of civilization are fraying, where technology has advanced just enough to be useful but not enough to make life better for most people. This is a future that hasn't evolved into something grand, it has decomposed into something desperate. The setting is more than just a backdrop. It is a reflection of the themes of decay, inevitability, and the cycle of violence that drives the film's story. Every location in Looper tells us something about its characters and the world they live in. From the crumbling streets of Kansas City to the vast emptiness of the countryside, each setting enhances the mood and deepens the film's emotional impact. Kansas City in Looper is a city on the brink of collapse. It is dirty, crime-ridden, and filled with people trying to survive in a system that no longer works for them. The streets are lined with beggars, addicts hooked on dropper drugs, and desperate men willing to do anything to get ahead. It's a world where violence isn't just common, it's expected. The presence of organized crime isn't something hidden in the shadows, it is woven into the very structure of society. This decay is seen in the production design. Buildings look like they have been abandoned for years, their paint peeling, their windows cracked. Many of the cars on the road aren't sleek futuristic models, but old vehicles that have been modified with crude, makeshift solar panels. The city is filled with the ghosts of a once thriving economy, now reduced to survivalism and lawlessness. The cinematography in Kansas City reinforces this sense of entrapment. The camera often uses tight, claustrophobic framing, showing characters pressed up against grimy walls or trapped in dimly lit rooms. There is little color here. Everything is washed out, muted, dominated by shades of brown and gray. The lighting is often harsh and artificial, casting long shadows that make every corner feel dangerous. And then there's the contrast of the countryside. When Joe flees the city and arrives at Sarah's farm, it's like stepping into another world. The cinematography shifts. Wide, open landscapes replace the tight urban framing, and the color palette changes to warmer, earthy tones. The air feels cleaner. The tension is still there, but it's different now. Instead of the immediate danger of city violence, there is a quiet, looming dread, the knowledge that something bigger is coming. The farm itself is isolated, surrounded by endless fields of corn that stretch into the horizon. The house is sturdy but visibly aged, as if it has stood alone for decades, untouched by time. It is a place of safety, but also of vulnerability. There are no neon signs, no towering skyscrapers, just an old farmhouse, a dirt road, and the weight of the past pressing down on the present. This shift in setting is not accidental. It mirrors the shift in Joe himself. When he's in the city, he is selfish, reactive, trapped in the cycle of violence that has defined his life. But in the countryside, he begins to see the bigger picture. He sees Sarah's love for her son. He sees the possibility of a different future. He understands, for the first time, that there is something worth protecting beyond himself. The cinematography in these scenes emphasizes this transformation. Long, uninterrupted takes allow moments to breathe, giving the audience time to absorb the emotions in each interaction. The camera lingers on small, intimate details. Sarah's hand on Sid's shoulder, the way the wind moves through the cornfields, the flickering of an oil lamp in the darkness. These choices make the farm feel real, lived in, and deeply human. But even in this quiet setting, there is an underlying tension that never fully disappears. The way the camera captures Sid, for example, is different from how it captures other characters. When he is calm, the shots are soft, natural, making him look like an ordinary child. But when his emotions surge, the camera work shifts. Low angles make him seem larger, more imposing, while subtle distortions in the frame hint at something unnatural beneath the surface. One of the most striking uses of cinematography in the film comes during Sid's telekinetic outburst. As his fear and anger reach their peak, the entire room begins to shake. Objects rise into the air, caught in a force that cannot be seen but can be felt. Instead of using fast cuts or frantic camera movement, the scene unfolds in slow, deliberate motion, making it feel even more unsettling. The sound design adds to this effect: low-frequency vibrations, deep rumbling, the eerie hum of telekinetic power building to an explosion. It's a moment that is both terrifying and tragic, because we see that Sid doesn't fully understand his own power. Lighting plays a crucial role in shaping the film's atmosphere. In Kansas City, the lighting is often harsh and unflattering, filled with fluorescent greens and sickly yellows that make everything feel artificial. The interiors of Joe's apartment and the Looper hangouts are bathed in shadows, emphasizing the loneliness and emptiness of his life. But at Sarah's farm, the lighting is natural and warm, filled with soft golden hues during the day and deep, rich blues at night. The transition from these two lighting styles isn't just aesthetic, it's thematic. Light represents hope, clarity, and the possibility of change, while darkness represents desperation and inevitability. This contrast is most obvious in the film's final scene. As Joe makes his ultimate choice, the lighting shifts once again. The field is bathed in a fading sunset, casting long, dramatic shadows across the cornfields. It is a moment of both ending and beginning, of sacrifice and renewal. The camera holds steady as Joe watches old Joe, as he sees Sid's transformation unfolding in real time. The framing of this moment is perfect. Joe stands alone, his silhouette outlined against the dying light, the realization of what must be done reflected in his eyes. Then, the final gunshot. A simple, quiet moment, but one that reverberates through the entire film. There is no grand explosion, no over-the-top visual effect, just a single action that breaks the cycle, altering the future forever. The cinematography, sound, and production design in Looper work together to create a world that is both immersive and symbolic. Every frame tells a story, reinforcing the themes of time, destiny, and the weight of choices. It's not just about where the film takes place, it's about how those places shape the people within them. By choosing a setting that feels familiar yet decayed, by using cinematography that emphasizes intimacy over spectacle, and by creating a contrast between the city's chaos and the farm's quiet dread, Looper achieves something rare in science fiction. It doesn't just show us a future, it makes us feel it. It makes us understand that the future isn't something distant and abstract. It is shaped by the choices we make right now, in the present. And sometimes, the only way to change the future is to let go of the past. Making Looper was a journey filled with unexpected challenges, strange creative decisions, and moments of pure cinematic ingenuity. It wasn't just another sci-fi film, it was a passion project, carefully crafted by director Rian Johnson and brought to life by a cast and crew who believed in its story. But what happened behind the scenes was often just as fascinating as what appeared on screen. The production of Looper wasn't like most big-budget Hollywood sci-fi films. Instead of relying on massive CGI spectacle, Johnson wanted a grounded, practical approach. The movie had a budget of just $30 million, which meant that every shot, every effect, and every decision had to be carefully thought out. There was no room for waste. The team had to be creative, be resourceful, and sometimes even improvise on the spot. One of the biggest challenges from the start was casting two actors to play the same person at different ages. Joseph Gordon-Levitt was the first to be cast, but once Bruce Willis came on board to play Old Joe, a major issue became clear. They didn't look alike at all. Most films would have simply ignored this detail, relying on the audience's suspension of disbelief. But Johnson wasn't satisfied with that. He wanted the connection between young Joe and Old Joe to feel real. That's when the makeup team stepped in. Every morning, before filming, Joseph Gordon-Levitt spent hours in the makeup chair. His face was altered with prosthetics, subtle facial reshaping, and contouring to make him resemble a younger version of Bruce Willis. But even with the physical transformation, there was still something missing. The way they spoke, moved, and carried themselves had to match. To prepare, Gordon-Levitt studied hours of Bruce Willis's performances. He focused on the way Willis spoke in short, clipped sentences, the way he narrowed his eyes when delivering a serious line, the way he walked with a slight swagger. But the real secret? Bruce Willis actually recorded some of young Joe's lines, allowing Gordon-Levitt to listen and mimic the cadence exactly. This level of detail made a huge difference. On set, even Willis was impressed. One day, during a break in filming, he turned to Gordon-Levitt and said, "You sound just like me." It was a moment of validation that proved all the work had paid off. But not everyone was convinced at first. Some crew members were initially distracted by the prosthetics, feeling that Gordon-Levitt looked almost robotic. Even some early test audiences were caught off guard by the change in his face. Over time, though, most people adjusted to the new look, and the film's bold choice paid off. The world of Looper itself presented another unique challenge. Johnson wanted the future to feel real, not overly polished or artificial. Instead of designing a futuristic world filled with flying cars and neon cities, he took a different approach. He made the future feel broken. Much of the film was shot in Louisiana, despite the story being set in Kansas City, 2044. The reason? Tax incentives made it significantly cheaper to shoot there. But transforming Louisiana into a decayed version of the future wasn't easy. The production team had to scout locations that already looked worn down, using abandoned buildings, old warehouses, and run-down streets to create a world that felt authentic. Even the futuristic cars in the film weren't actually futuristic at all. Most of them were old, repurposed vehicles modified with external wiring, makeshift solar panels, and extra exhaust pipes to make them look like they had been patched together over decades. This added to the film's realism. This wasn't a future of perfection, but a future where people were still struggling to survive. One of the most unexpected on-set challenges involved Pierce Gagnon, the young actor who played Sid. Finding a child actor who could deliver a performance that was both terrifying and sympathetic was no easy task. Many young actors auditioned, but none of them could fully grasp the complexity of the role. Then, Gagnon stepped in, and immediately blew everyone away. At just 5 years old, Gagnon was delivering performances with the intensity of a seasoned actor. His ability to shift between innocence and menace stunned the entire crew. Emily Blunt, who played his mother, later admitted in interviews that she was often caught off guard by how natural and eerie his performance was. Even more surprising, he barely needed direction. Most child actors require extensive coaching to hit the right emotional beats, but Gagnon seemed to understand his character on an instinctual level. Johnson later said, "There were times when we didn't even have to explain what was happening in the scene. Pierce just got it." One of the most challenging sequences to film was the telekinesis explosion scene, where Sid loses control of his powers. Unlike traditional CGI-heavy effects, the team wanted to achieve as much of the effect practically as possible. The solution: air cannons, hidden wires, and precise stunt choreography. To create the illusion of objects floating and flying across the room, the crew used high-powered air cannons to knock over furniture and throw debris into the air. Hidden rigs were used to lift objects and create subtle, unsettling movement, making it feel as though an invisible force was tearing the room apart. The combination of practical effects and just a small amount of digital enhancement made the scene one of the most visually striking in the film. Another scene that required careful planning was the Seth dismemberment sequence, one of the most disturbing moments in the movie. Instead of relying entirely on CGI to show Seth's body slowly vanishing, the filmmakers used a combination of prosthetics, makeup, and clever camera angles to create the illusion. Actor Paul Dano, who played Seth, had to act out each stage of his body deteriorating, reacting as his limbs disappeared one by one. The effect was so unsettling that even crew members on set found it difficult to watch. But one of the biggest surprises of the production was how much Bruce Willis enjoyed working on the film. Known for being selective with his projects, Willis found himself genuinely invested in Looper. In interviews, he later praised Rian Johnson's storytelling, calling the script one of the best he had read in years. On set, Willis was focused but relaxed, often joking with the crew between takes. One of the most memorable moments came during a break in filming when Willis picked up a guitar and started playing blues songs, drawing a small crowd of crew members who stood in awe as he played for nearly an hour. Emily Blunt also found herself in unexpected situations on set, particularly when it came to handling shotguns. Her character, Sara, is seen wielding a shotgun with ease, but in reality, Blunt had never fired one before. Determined to make her performance as authentic as possible, she trained extensively with weapons experts, learning how to hold, reload, and fire with precision. But on the first day of shooting with live blanks, she accidentally fired too soon, startling the entire crew. The take was ruined, but the moment became a running joke on set. Despite its modest budget and complex storytelling, Looper was completed on schedule and without any major production delays, a rare achievement for a sci-fi film. The crew worked tirelessly, ensuring that every shot was intentional, every detail carefully crafted. When Looper finally hit theaters, it was met with critical acclaim. Audiences were captivated not just by its thrilling action and time travel twists, but by the depth of its characters and the raw, emotional weight behind its storytelling. Looking back, it's easy to see why Looper still holds up today. It wasn't just about time travel. It was about the people caught in its grip, the moral choices they faced, and the sacrifices they made. And behind the camera, it was a film made by people who truly believed in its story, who went the extra mile to ensure that every detail, every performance, and every shot mattered. And maybe that's why Looper endures, not because of flashy effects or big-budget spectacle, but because it was built on something deeper. A story about time, fate, and the idea that no matter what, we always have a choice. Looper isn't just a time travel thriller. It isn't just about gunfights, paradoxes, or assassins trapped in an endless loop. Beneath the surface, beneath the mechanics of time travel and the sharp dialogue, it's a story about choice, fate, and the cycles we can't seem to break. It's about violence breeding more violence, about fear shaping the future, about whether we are doomed to repeat our mistakes or capable of changing them. Rian Johnson crafted a film that operates on multiple levels. On one hand, it's a high-concept sci-fi film, and on the other, it's a deeply philosophical meditation on destiny and free will. Every character in Looper struggles with these ideas in different ways. The young and old versions of Joe, Sara, and Sid, they are all caught in a web of consequences, trapped in a world where their decisions might be inevitable. And yet, Looper argues that fate is not fixed. The future is not predetermined. But breaking the cycle? That takes sacrifice. At the heart of the film is a theme that resonates across every timeline and every character. The cycle of violence and the cost of revenge. Looper is a story about loops, not just time loops, but cycles of violence, revenge, and suffering that perpetuate themselves. Joe is part of this cycle from the start. He's a looper, a man who kills without hesitation, knowing that one day he will be on the other side of the gun. The system is built this way. Kill now, knowing that your own execution is inevitable. Old Joe, coming back from the future, is another cog in this same machine. He is driven by revenge, the belief that he can prevent the suffering he endured by taking action in the past. But his method of stopping violence? More violence. He hunts down and kills children because he believes one of them will grow into the Rainmaker. This is where Looper delivers its most profound moral conflict. If you knew a child would become a monster, could you justify killing them before they did? Old Joe believes the answer is yes. He sees himself as the hero of his own story, erasing the Rainmaker before he can rise to power. But his actions aren't preventing a dark future, they are creating it. The film subtly plays with the idea of self-fulfilling prophecy. Old Joe's rampage against the Rainmaker's possible identities doesn't stop the Rainmaker. It ensures that the Rainmaker will come to exist. If he had never hunted Sid, would Sid ever have become the Rainmaker? If he had never pulled the trigger, would Sid have grown into a dictator? Violence begets violence. Retribution breeds more suffering. The system repeats itself. And then there's young Joe, a man who has spent his life looking out for himself. Unlike old Joe, he doesn't fight for love or vengeance. At least, not at first. His only concern is self-preservation. But when he sees what old Joe is doing, when he realizes the loop he's caught in, he makes the one choice that no one else has been willing to make. He stops the cycle. Not by fighting old Joe. Not by chasing him down or shooting him in a final dramatic standoff. He stops it by removing himself from the equation. He realizes that old Joe's quest for revenge will push Sid to become the Rainmaker. And if old Joe never exists, then Sid's fate is no longer written. Joe's final action, the gun turned on himself, is the breaking of the cycle. It's the only true choice in a world where everything seems inevitable. Symbolism, the broken future and the scarred present. The world of Looper is not a clean, pristine vision of the future. It is decayed, crumbling, worn out. The cities are in disrepair. The people are either rich beyond belief or trapped in poverty, barely scraping by. It's a future where things haven't progressed, they've deteriorated. This isn't just set design. It's symbolic of the movie's core themes. A future like this isn't built in a day. It's the result of bad decisions compounding over time. The world of Looper is a reflection of a society stuck in an endless loop. Power in the hands of criminals, people forced into desperate choices, and a system that ensures suffering is passed down from one generation to the next. This is why Sid is such an important character. He is the embodiment of both destruction and potential. He isn't evil. He isn't good. He is a child who has the capacity for both, depending on how he is raised. He represents the future itself, something that can either break free from the cycle or repeat it in an even more violent form. Sarah's farm, in contrast to the city, is a place untouched by corruption. The cinematography shifts when we arrive at the farm. Suddenly, the wide-open landscapes give us room to breathe. The color palette shifts from the grays and browns of the city to golden hues, earthy tones, and softer lighting. This isn't just aesthetic, it's symbolic of possibility. The farm represents a world that could exist outside the loop of violence. It is the only place where characters talk about a future in a hopeful way. Sarah believes in Sid's ability to grow into a good man. She believes that she can protect him from the world's cruelty. But the looming threat of Old Joe threatens that fragile hope. If he succeeds in his mission, the farm becomes just another battleground in the cycle of death. And that's why young Joe's final act, his choice to end himself, matters so much. It isn't just about stopping Old Joe. It's about preserving the one place in the world that still represents hope. Fate versus free will. Can we change the future? Perhaps the most debated theme in Looper is the tension between fate and free will. From the beginning, characters talk about the future as though it's already written. Joe knows he will one day have to close his own loop. Old Joe believes he has already seen the future, that he must kill the Rainmaker to prevent the horrors that await him. The world itself seems built on the idea that people don't change, that they are doomed to become the people they will become. But Looper challenges this. Old Joe believes he has to act violently to change the future, but he is wrong. He is blinded by his grief, by his belief that the past is unchangeable except through destruction. Young Joe, however, sees the truth. The only way to break fate is not through force, but through sacrifice. This is what makes the ending so powerful. Young Joe's death isn't just a tragic conclusion. It's proof that the future is malleable. By taking himself out of the loop, he creates a future that neither version of him has ever seen before. A future where Sid might never become the Rainmaker. A future where Sarah gets to raise her son in peace. A future that is no longer trapped in an endless cycle of violence. The final statement of Looper. The film's themes are not just layered into the story. They are reinforced by every aspect of the film's cinematography, setting, and character arcs. The decaying world mirrors the idea of a future built on suffering. The contrast between the city and the farm represents the possibility of escape from violence. The cycle of revenge plays out through Old Joe's desperate mission. And the only true act of free will, the only way to break the loop, is young Joe's final decision. Ultimately, Looper asks a question that lingers long after the credits roll. Are we bound by our past? Or do we have the power to change our future? And the answer it gives is simple, yet profound. We are not trapped. But change always comes at a cost. Making Looper wasn't just about telling a great story. It was about crafting a cinematic experience that felt different from any other sci-fi film. Time travel movies often fall into the trap of being too flashy, too focused on spectacle, or too tangled in their own logic. But Looper took a different path. It stripped everything down, grounding its world in realism, making the future feel worn out and lived in, and using filmmaking techniques that made every moment feel intimate and impactful. From its cinematography to its sound design, from its practical effects to its unique approach to editing, Looper was a film that knew exactly how it wanted to look, feel, and sound. And that precision, that commitment to style, tone, and atmosphere, is what made it so memorable. One of the boldest choices Rian Johnson made as a director was to keep the world of the future subtle and low-tech. In most sci-fi films, the future is a spectacle. Hovering skyscrapers, neon-lit megacities, flying cars zipping through the sky. But Looper didn't want to impress the audience with futuristic grandeur. Instead, it created a world where the future felt natural, like an extension of our own time. The way Johnson and his team achieved this was by modifying real-world objects rather than designing entirely new futuristic technology. Cars in Looper weren't sleek, futuristic machines. They were old, outdated vehicles with crude solar panels bolted to the hood. The guns weren't laser weapons or sci-fi blasters. They were simple, brutal firearms that felt outdated and heavy, adding to the film's Western-inspired tone. Even the costume design reflected this philosophy. Instead of dressing his characters in futuristic armor or sleek jumpsuits, Johnson opted for muted, timeless clothing. The Loopers wear long trench coats, simple shirts, and rugged boots, clothes that could just as easily belong in a noir film as a sci-fi thriller. This made the world feel more authentic, more connected to the present, reinforcing the idea that the future isn't always as advanced as we imagine. But the real magic of Looper wasn't just in its setting, it was in how it was filmed. Johnson and cinematographer Steve Yedlin made intentional choices in camera work, framing, and lighting to enhance the film's themes. In Kansas City, where Joe begins his story, the cinematography feels tight, claustrophobic, and gritty. The camera stays close to the characters, trapping them within the frame, making the city feel like a cage. The lighting is harsh and artificial, bathing everything in cold, sterile tones. This reinforces Joe's world, a life built around routine, self-interest, and a false sense of control. But once Joe reaches Sarah's farm, the cinematography completely shifts. The camera opens up, wide shots replace tight framing, giving the environment a sense of space and freedom. The colors become warmer, richer, filled with natural light and earthy tones. The movement of the camera slows, allowing moments to breathe, emphasizing the contrast between the city's suffocating chaos and the farm's quiet tension. This wasn't just a visual choice, it was a storytelling choice. It made us feel the difference between these two worlds. It made us understand why Joe's journey wasn't just about fighting his future self, it was about seeing the possibility of something different. One of the most distinct filmmaking choices in Looper was its use of editing and pacing. Many modern sci-fi films rely on fast cuts, rapid montages, and aggressive action sequences, but Looper took a different approach. The editing is patient, allowing scenes to unfold naturally. The diner scene between young Joe and old Joe, for example, doesn't rely on quick cuts or dramatic music. Instead, it lingers, long, steady shots hold on the two men as they talk, allowing the tension to build not through flashy editing, but through performance. This kind of editing is rare in action-heavy films. It forces the audience to sit with the weight of what's being said, to absorb the moral dilemmas at play, to engage with the moment instead of being rushed through it. But when Looper does use fast editing, it uses it with purpose. The action scenes, like Old Joe's escape or the brutal warehouse shootouts, are edited tightly, with sharp, sudden cuts that create a sense of chaos. There's no excessive slow motion, no overly stylized sequences, just raw, brutal momentum. And then there's the sound design, one of the film's most underappreciated elements. Sound plays a huge role in shaping Looper's world. The weapons don't sound futuristic, they sound heavy, loud, and brutal. The blunderbuss that Loopers use doesn't have the clean, crisp sound of a typical movie gun. It has a thick, ear-rattling echo, making every shot feel like a hammer hitting steel. The use of silence is equally important. In key moments, like when Sid's telekinesis activates, the film strips away all background noise, creating a vacuum of sound that makes the moment feel even more unsettling. It's a technique used in horror films, where silence becomes more terrifying than any explosion or gunshot. This attention to sound is most effective in Sid's climactic telekinetic outburst. Instead of relying on loud music or rapid cuts, the film slows down, allowing the tension to rise naturally. Objects begin floating, The air hums with unseen energy, and then, in a single devastating moment, everything erupts. That moment, where the film shifts from quiet dread to overwhelming destruction, is one of the most powerful uses of sound in modern sci-fi. But Looper wasn't just an artistic success, it was a commercial hit, too. Made on a $30 million budget, it was a modestly sized production by Hollywood standards. Yet, despite its smaller scale, Looper grossed over $176 million worldwide, proving that a film doesn't need an enormous budget to tell an impactful story. Part of its success came from its originality. In an era dominated by sequels, remakes, and franchises, Looper stood out as something new. Audiences were drawn to its fresh take on time travel, its gripping performances, and its unexpected emotional depth. Another factor in its success was word of mouth. After its release, Looper quickly gained a reputation as a must-watch sci-fi film, and audiences who might not have originally been interested were drawn in by glowing reviews and personal recommendations. Critically, Looper was praised for its storytelling, its performances, and its ability to balance action with intelligence. It wasn't just an entertaining sci-fi film, it was a thought-provoking one, a film that left audiences debating its themes long after they left the theater. Even today, more than a decade after its release, Looper remains one of the most respected and influential sci-fi films of its era. It proved that high-concept ideas don't need massive budgets, they just need strong storytelling, sharp direction, and a clear vision. The way it used cinematography, sound, editing, and production design to immerse the audience in its world is a lesson in how filmmaking should serve the story, not the other way around. And maybe that's why Looper still resonates. It isn't just about time travel. It isn't just about action or spectacle. It's about the way choices shape the future, the way small moments define everything, and the idea that breaking a cycle, changing destiny, always comes with a cost. And sometimes, that cost is the most powerful cinematic moment of all. Bringing Looper to life wasn't just about clever storytelling and sharp direction. It was about the people who made it happen. Every film, no matter how strong its concept, lives or dies by the performances of its cast. Looper needed actors who could handle high-stakes drama, raw emotion, and the physical intensity of an action thriller, all while making the story feel grounded and human. It wasn't just a sci-fi movie. It was a deeply personal character study wrapped in a world of time loops and fate. And the cast delivered. From Joseph Gordon-Levitt's transformation into a young Bruce Willis to Emily Blunt's unexpected but powerful performance as a protective mother, to Pierce Gagnon's shockingly intense turn as a child who might become a monster, Looper had a lineup of performances that elevated the film far beyond its genre. But what made these performances so unforgettable wasn't just what happened on screen, it was what happened behind the scenes. The chemistry between the actors, the challenges they faced, and the way audiences responded to their work all became part of Looper's legacy. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, becoming Bruce Willis. The role of young Joe was one of the most demanding performances of Joseph Gordon-Levitt's career, not just because he had to lead a major sci-fi film, but because he had to convince audiences that he was a younger version of Bruce Willis. It was a challenge that very few actors would have been willing to take on. After all, time travel movies usually don't worry too much about whether two actors look alike. But Rian Johnson was determined to make it work. So Gordon-Levitt went through an intense transformation process. Makeup artists spent hours every day altering his face, adjusting his nose, reshaping his jawline, and subtly modifying his features to resemble Willis. The prosthetics were subtle but effective. Though some audiences found them slightly uncanny at first, they helped create a seamless connection between young Joe and old Joe. But it wasn't just about looking the part. Gordon-Levitt studied Bruce Willis obsessively. He watched his old movies, mimicked his movements, and even had Willis record some of young Joe's dialogue so he could practice speaking with the same rhythm and tone. He worked on replicating the way Willis squints when he's thinking, the way he delivers lines with a slight smirk, the way he carries himself like he's been through a lifetime of battles. The result? A performance that didn't feel like an imitation, but an evolution. Audiences weren't just seeing Joseph Gordon-Levitt in makeup. They were seeing a younger Bruce Willis, a man who hadn't yet been hardened by time but was on his way there. Even Willis himself was impressed. In an interview, he admitted, "There were moments on set where I'd be watching Joe do a scene, and I'd think, damn, that's me. He nailed it. It was weird, kind of eerie, actually." Gordon-Levitt later said that while the transformation was exhausting, it was one of the most rewarding roles he had ever taken on. "I've played a lot of different characters in my career, but this was the first time I really had to think about someone else's performance while doing my own. It was a fun challenge." Bruce Willis, the veteran who brought the weight of the future. While Gordon-Levitt had the challenge of becoming Bruce Willis, Willis had the challenge of making Old Joe a deeply compelling character. This wasn't just a typical action role for him. Old Joe is tragic, conflicted, and morally compromised. He's not a hero. He's a man desperately trying to undo the worst moments of his life, no matter the cost. Willis brought layers of emotion to the role that weren't necessarily on the page. He played Old Joe with quiet grief, with simmering rage, with a sadness that made his actions feel inevitable but heartbreaking. In interviews, Willis described the role as one of the most emotionally complex characters he had played in years. "He's a guy who has seen everything fall apart. He's lost the one thing that made his life meaningful. And now he's back in the past, knowing that if he just does this one thing, kills this one kid, he can fix it all. But it's never that simple." Rian Johnson later said that Willis brought a deep understanding of the character that went beyond the script. Bruce knew exactly who Old Joe was the moment he read the script. He didn't just play him as an assassin. He played him as a man who had already lost. Emily Blunt, the unexpected but perfect Sara. When people think of Emily Blunt, they don't usually picture her chopping wood on a farm and wielding a shotgun. But that's exactly what she did in Looper. Her character, Sara, is the emotional core of the film. She is the only person fighting for something other than herself. While the two Joes are trapped in their own war, Sara's focus is simple: protect her son, no matter what. Blunt's casting was initially surprising to some. She had mostly been known for roles in period dramas and romantic comedies, not gritty sci-fi thrillers. But her performance stunned audiences and critics alike. She completely transformed herself for the role, adopting an American accent, learning how to handle a shotgun, and fully embodying the resilience of a single mother trying to keep her son safe from the future. In interviews, Blunt talked about how deeply she connected with Sara's story. She's this strong, fierce woman, but she's also deeply afraid. She knows what her son is capable of. She knows what could happen if he loses control. But she refuses to let the world decide his fate for him. Rian Johnson later admitted that Blunt brought a level of depth and vulnerability to the role that he hadn't expected. She gave Sara this incredible balance: strength and fear, love and desperation. She made her feel real. Pierce Gagnon, the child who stole the show. But the real breakout performance of Looper came from Pierce Gagnon, the young actor who played Sid, the child with terrifying powers. At just 5 years old, Gagnon delivered a performance that shocked everyone on set. He wasn't just playing a kid, he was playing a possible supervillain in the making. What made his performance so haunting was how effortlessly he could switch between sweet and terrifying. One moment, he was an innocent child. The next, his stare alone was enough to make the audience uneasy. Even Emily Blunt, who had worked with many great actors, admitted that Gagnon was one of the most talented actors she had ever met. He would do these incredibly emotional scenes without any hesitation. He was so natural, so intuitive. It was honestly kind of intimidating. Rian Johnson later said that Gagnon understood the weight of his character better than most adults would. He knew exactly who Sid was. He knew he had to be both vulnerable and terrifying. And he nailed it. Audience reactions and critical praise. When Looper hit theaters, it was an instant success. Critics praised its smart storytelling, strong performances, and emotional depth. Audiences were drawn to its original take on time travel, its philosophical themes, and its unexpected character-driven moments. Many reviews highlighted how the film balanced action with intelligence, never letting its time travel mechanics overshadow its emotional weight. Some audience reactions included: "This is what sci-fi should be, exciting, thought-provoking, and full of great performances." Joseph Gordon-Levitt didn't just play a young Bruce Willis. He became him. Pierce Gagnon gave the best child performance I've seen in years. Even a decade after its release, Looper remains one of the most respected sci-fi films of its era. It wasn't just a time travel story. It was a story about choice, sacrifice, and breaking the cycles that trap us. And that's why it still resonates. Time is a loop, a cycle of cause and effect, of choices made and consequences felt. That's the heart of Looper, a film that isn't just about time travel. It's about what we do with the time we have. It's a story about self-destruction and self-preservation, about fate and free will, about whether we are doomed to repeat our mistakes or capable of breaking the cycle. And it's a film that, more than a decade after its release, still stands as one of the most thought-provoking sci-fi thrillers of its time. We've explored every angle of Looper, from its deeply complex themes of fate and morality, to its striking cinematography and production design, to the incredible performances that made it all come to life. It's a film that was built on bold choices, both in its storytelling and its filmmaking techniques. Rian Johnson didn't just create another action-packed time travel movie. He created a world that felt real, lived in, and filled with emotional weight. One of the most compelling aspects of Looper is how it refuses to be boxed into one genre. It's part sci-fi, part action, part western, part noir, and at its core, a character-driven drama about what it means to be trapped by our own decisions. The characters in Looper are not just moving through time, they are struggling against it. We watched Joseph Gordon-Levitt transform himself into a younger Bruce Willis, not just through prosthetics but through movement, speech, and mannerisms. We saw Emily Blunt step into an unexpected role, delivering a powerhouse performance as a mother fighting for her son's future. And we witnessed Pierce Gagnon, a child actor who stole the entire film, bringing both vulnerability and terrifying power to the screen. The themes of Looper resonate because they are universal. We all face the weight of our past choices. We all wonder if we are on a set path or if we can break free from the patterns that define us. And the film offers a powerful answer. We are not bound by fate, but change always comes at a cost. The filmmaking behind Looper was just as meticulous as its story. Johnson and his team used cinematography, sound, and editing to create a world that felt tangible and immersive. They built a future that wasn't sleek and polished but gritty, broken, and barely holding itself together, mirroring the state of its characters. We explored how the film's subtle use of practical effects, its unique approach to time travel, and its raw, grounded action sequences all contributed to making it stand out in the sci-fi genre. While many time travel movies focus on paradoxes and overly complex mechanics, Looper kept its focus on people, on emotion, on the choices that shape lives. And then there's that ending. The moment young Joe sees the truth, understands the loop, and makes the ultimate sacrifice to stop it. It's a conclusion that is both shocking and inevitable. It's not about winning a fight. It's not about outsmarting the past or the future. It's about breaking the cycle in the only way that truly matters. That's why Looper is more than just a sci-fi thriller. It's a meditation on destiny, violence, and the weight of every action we take. Even years after its release, Looper remains one of the most widely discussed and re-watched sci-fi films of its era. It's a film that invites debate, that lingers in your mind long after the credits roll. Some people walk away questioning the nature of time travel. Others are left thinking about fate, regret, and the possibility of change. And that's the sign of a truly great film. It doesn't just entertain, it makes you think. Now, we want to hear from you. What did you think of Looper? Did you agree with young Joe's final decision? Do you think Sid's future was truly changed? What was your favorite scene, your favorite performance? Was there a detail or theory about the film that we didn't cover? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep this discussion going. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into Looper, don't forget to give this video a like. It helps more than you know. If you love exploring the themes, hidden details, and behind-the-scenes stories of the best films ever made, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a breakdown like this one. There are so many more movies to analyze, so many more stories to explore. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning. Until next time, keep watching, keep questioning, and remember, sometimes the only way to change the future is to let go of the past.